Hello and welcome to HR Table Talk. This is a podcast style webinar designed for HR leaders in the SMB space, featuring topics from Verified First's HR at the Table webinar series. I'm Jess Rowe from Verified First, and I'm joined by my colleague Brianna Rosenkrantz, as well as Ali Kelly from JazzHR. Today we'll be unwrapping some of the insights that MSI's VP of HR shared on how to effectively manage organizational risk. So glad you could join us. Let's get started. Ali, what was one of the greatest takeaways you got from the HR at the Table webinar with Chris Corneen?
Yeah, and first I should say thank you so much for having me on this. This is super exciting, and I thought the webinar with Chris was fantastic. For me, what really stood out the most was when Chris was mentioning the importance of understanding both the business and the people aspect and diving into culture, making sure that all the executives and leadership are really aligned on the core mission and values of the organization and sort of using that to successfully navigate and set strategies for the business moving forward. And I really think that this helps to understand, where your company is today, where you're thriving and where your challenges and risks are, so that you can really understand how to best set the goals that you need and how to get there in an achievable way. In the hiring world, understanding where any of these inefficiencies or risks might live in your process is really an increasingly important part of the hiring process. And it's so critical to hire quality talent fast, right? So focusing not just on bodies, but really making sure that it's the right talent. And that's something we'll be diving more into, I think, as this conversation goes on.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. And it really is great. I'm glad you pointed out setting and understanding a benchmark for where your company is at in the current stage. And it's important to identify that first before you can then position your goals and what it looks like to streamline the trajectory to get there. So it's great that you pointed that out. And really, organizations are nothing without their people. People are the foundation. You can have a great business plan, but if you don't have anyone to execute, then chances of success significantly decrease. In essence, finding the right talent can make or break an organization. So to kick us off, Brianna, when looking at the foundation of these smaller organizations, what type of risk exists in the hiring process?
Right. Well, first off, I want to say, thank you for having me on this podcast today. I'm really excited, especially having Ali here. So I'm excited to hear about her input and how that connects to JazzHR. So, to start, in smaller organizations, the two biggest risks in the hiring process are consistency and finding the right fit for the role. First off, smaller organizations who are rapidly growing and have a difficulty keeping up risk those inconsistent hiring practices. And, it's not just about how rapidly they're growing, but it's about the resources they have to support them throughout the process. And that's where it is vital to hone in on your policies and practices to not only help keep you accountable, but to also help avoid those discriminatory hiring practices and to help protect you should an applicant or an employee claim unfair treatment or discrimination. Secondly, a hiring decision can largely impact your workplace culture, especially in smaller organizations where one individual can have a much larger reach and impact on your small community. Part of finding the right fit for the role means vetting your candidates. As a background screening company, our role in the hiring process is to equip employers with relevant information to make a hiring decision, whether that be through background checks or drug tests or verifications. Although someone's past isn't necessarily indicative of their future, it can help reveal a candidate's character, their trustworthiness, and also help determine their fit for the position. Not to mention, studies have shown that vetting your candidates in this way creates safe workplaces and also helps minimize the legal ramifications with a bad hire. As mentioned a moment ago, we talked about how one aspect of vetting your candidates could be undergoing a drug test, and this can have a drastic impact on your organization as a whole. Studies have shown that organizations who participate in drug-free workplaces have seen benefits such as increased morale and productivity, decreased absenteeism, theft, turnover, downtime, etc. And they've also seen increased health statuses among employees and their family members, and a decrease in healthcare costs. So, although aside from this, although there's always going to be those inherent risks in the hiring process, there are actually some risks that we encourage hiring managers to really lean into. And one of those is hiring for those transferable skill sets or the potential for skills rather than experience, which that one's a little scary because you associate less risk with more experience. However, that's not always the case. And especially in smaller organizations where you're competing for the same talent with larger organizations, having the ability to hire for those transferable skills really sets the foundation for finding the right fit for your organization of talent. Now, Ali, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. What does JazzHR do to help HR professionals find the right talent?
Sure. So as an applicant tracking system, JazzHR is purpose-built for small and medium-sized organizations, and it really replaces any of the manual or time-consuming hiring tasks associated with recruiting with intuitive tools and automation to help hiring managers and anyone involved in the recruiting process or responsible for recruiting, I should say, to find and hire the right talent fast. How we actually do that is through a number of different primary functions. One, we enable collaboration across teams. So instead of having communication in a number of different places or texting, feedback on someone or not having a secure place to track all of that, we keep all of your communications and collaboration in one place that allows you to not just streamline and simplify that process, but it allows you to audit and use that information in the future. A lot of the sourcing and screening and scheduling activities, even things like offers and e-signatures for digital signing, really cut your time to hire significantly. So we see usually over 50% is not an unheard of number for us in terms of time saved, and we really enable data-driven analysis to optimize that whole process. Another part of what we do is we really have a one-click posting mechanism that allows you to get a lot more candidates with a lot of superior sourcing capabilities and save time by just automatically posting to more than 25 job boards, social media, and a few other places as well. And then finally, we round it out with a super powerful tech stack of integrations that really allow anywhere in your HR tech stack to just plug right into JazzHR. And again, it's keeping whether it's video interviewing, assessments, background checks like Verified First, right? It's just an easy one-click integration, and it keeps everything in one place, which really allows you to stay, for you to stay in one place and reduces your risk of information getting into the wrong hands or not putting something in the right place. And it's so far been a great time saver and resource for a lot of growing organizations, and we're growing very fast, and it's exciting to be part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And great that you mentioned that JazzHR really streamlines all of those different processes into one comprehensive platform and place for people to be able to go into. You can keep track of your notes on candidates, pre-adverse action or other actions on potential candidates for the position. So great that everything is in one place. Definitely very helpful, especially when you've got a dashboard of a lot of different programs running at once. Having that all in one place is super helpful. So great that you touched on that. And Brianna, HR professionals in smaller organizations do tend to face different sets of risk in their department. What does risk management look like for them, and how can HR professionals reduce risk in their day-to-day operations?
Right, great question, Jess. So typically, the HR professionals in smaller organizations are dealing with limited resources, whether that be time, manpower, finances, knowledge, whatever it may be. Oftentimes they're working in smaller teams, if not one-person departments. Sometimes there's not even a dedicated HR function, rather an administration worker handling HR-related tasks. So I'm sure you can imagine that there are many HR professionals in these smaller organizations who have to wear many more hats than HR professionals in larger organizations because they're dealing with the HR function from start to finish. It's not broken up into various teams that are existing within the HR department to complete functions. They see everything from, recruiting to hiring, to onboarding, to open enrollment, to benefits, sometimes payroll. So really they're touching a lot of different things in the organization, and that means there's a lot of risk mitigation that goes into that. So having the compliance in this area is very vital for these HR professionals in the smaller organizations. Another risk factor for smaller organizations exists within organizations who are growing rapidly without that proper support. A little bit about what we were mentioning earlier. Chris Corneen from the original webinar suggested that HR technology should advance at the same rate as an organization's technology, if not faster. However, as we know, this is not always the case with HR professionals. They typically get stuck with these antiquated processes, and they're trying to use that to support a rapidly growing business. And within this can cause issues in compliance or data management or security. However, there are ways that they can help mitigate this risk with limited resources. And, mind you, I'm not a lawyer or anything, so if you're really looking to revamp your process, always consult legal counsel and make sure that your policies and practices are up to par. However, from my experience, the first thing that HR professionals can do is ensure clean and accurate data. And this one is so important because it's something that you can help mitigate. Unfortunately, there's not always a way to mitigate, translation issues, whether you're trying to translate something on paper to the computer and you might not be able to read it because it's illegible, or perhaps the information that you are translating was messed up on the user side. So the second thing is to stay organized. And with these paper filing processes, there's a risk in losing documentation and mixing up confidential information, perhaps with another employee's information. So there's some compliance issues there. So that's why it's really important to try and stay organized if you do have those paper filing processes. The second thing that goes hand in hand with that is to create a system. And if you are doing those manual processes and implementing and uploading your work into the computer via a scanner, then really create a scanning procedure there. Creating the naming conventions and the filing conventions, and this can help your organization stay more compliant and make sure that the data is where you need it to be. The fourth thing is to reduce those costs. So typically in HR, higher costs are associated with, non-compliance fines, and in HR, the more you can reduce these costs means the more you're making your organization compliant. So find the high costs in your organization and figure out what needs to happen to decrease them and increase compliance. Now, these are all internal risks that are within your control. Many of these risks can be combated by eliminating those manual processes with those HR technology solutions. However, we know that investing in technology is not always an easy decision. So, Ali, this is where I want to get your input. What ways can an automated workflow assist HR professionals in internal risk management in regards to hiring and candidate management?
Right. So without being redundant with everything that you just described, what an organization or what technology like JazzHR is able to do is put all of those things in place that you just talked about. So, ensuring clean and accurate data, to staying organized, to actually building a system for you. And whether you already have one in place or you need one with a little bit of guidance, an ATS can do all of that, right? I'd say more so the two most important aspects in this regard are really, one, when you have this automation in place, you're increasing the chance of a successful hire because you are enabled to focus on the quality of that candidate versus the volume or just the general getting some a body in place. Secondly, decreasing cost per hire, and simultaneously increasing the quality of the hire is probably the most holistic approach to reducing risk when it comes to this automation. When it comes to the cost reduction aspect, businesses have a better chance of reducing costs simply through automation for a number of reasons, right? They can get the similar levels of output even after reduction of manual power. Reducing time between hiring stages means saving money spent per hire. Automated workflows have the potential to reduce the average time to hire from its current rate of about 36 days. Rather than waiting for all members of the hiring team to submit their feedback, a thoughtful ATS is going to assign tasks and automatically move candidates through the pipeline based on those actions or those tasks. So this means that recruiters are spending less time on, sending messages and capturing feedback from, rogue hiring managers like myself, and they can really focus on doing what they do best, which is making that human connection and, focusing on more valuable projects for the organization. When we think about the improved quality of people and the overall process, a lot of this automation provides organizations with the time they need to record interactions or product history and work that allow them to improve the overall quality of not just the hire, but the process in general. And so in addition to this, with the right techniques, the organizations can get enough time to develop really feature-filled services or products for future use. And it really can help inform that overall approach.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned, one of the important factors to mitigating overall risk within a position and really across the organization is investing time in the quality of hire and not focusing all of your energy around just filling the seat as quickly as possible, but truly looking at the long-term approach and, the consequences of a potentially bad hire extend far beyond just that single instance, but it impacts multiple departments. So truly investing the time at the forefront and the quality definitely pays dividends long term. So that's important. And while risk mitigation is important to an organization, it can also be seen as a hindrance to HR's initiatives. I know Chris suggested that the path to executive alignment is to think more like a business person and less like a risk person. Brianna, can you share more on what this means?
Yeah, of course. So really what it comes down to is speaking the language of executives. And I'm going to bring an office reference in here. But, we all know those great Toby references from The Office. And when we look at that situation, we can see how disliked Toby is by Michael because he's constantly trying to place these rules and expectations on him. And Michael is just not having it. And so, although The Office is a prime example of everything not to do in the workplace, it really helps to highlight that stereotypical relationship between executive leadership and their HR department. HR is quote unquote the fun killer. However, oftentimes these HR professionals become so preoccupied with preventing risk that they're actually preventing executive leaders from seeing the value in what they're bringing to the table. This is where Chris Cordine suggested that HR professionals need to know when to think less like a risk person and more like a business person to really help communicate that value to executive leadership in language that they understand that connects back to the bottom line. Ultimately, the HR department operates as a service function within the organization. Their role is to help people and their organization be successful by advising them on information they need to make a decision. And, rather than operating as the decision maker in these cases, operate as a mediator to help individuals understand what they might not know about the situation. This is where Chris Cordine says to get the word no out of your vocabulary. By thinking less like a risk person and more like a business person, that's where Chris says you're going to start to change some minds about the value you bring to the organization. Now, I did want to touch on what you, Jess and Ali, were talking about, and we did a discussion with Chris Cordine, and he was talking about how individuals in organizations are, they have this mindset to hire cheap labor to, some organizations do have that idea that they need bodies in the door, so they're going to hire cheap labor. However, we've seen the statistics, it can cost $4,000 to hire a new employee. However, it can take 6 to 9 months of that employee's salary to replace them. And that's from the Talent Acquisition Technology Buyer's Guide we recently produced with Aptitude Research. And what he was saying is that we need to get rid of the idea that we can just hire cheap labor because cheap labor isn't that cheap. So, when it comes to thinking like a business person and less like a risk person, this really involves that conversation about, focusing on the candidate experience and how that connects to the bottom line, because that's a hefty amount of money to be giving up just to get people in the door. So, Allie, I want to turn back to you. It is important to think less like a risk person and more like a business person. However, it's also important to be very well-rounded in this. So what ways can HR professionals think both risk and business minded?
Yeah, I think if you're able to sort of step back and connect what you're doing from sort of a mitigation standpoint to the greater business value or the ROI of your investment, is it probably the most complex, but the simplest thought process in terms of how to get there, right? So, we know that the cost of a bad hire is astronomical. If average costs are over $4,000 just to, and over a month to get a new hire in the door, focusing on the ability to really reduce the financial and cultural risk of that, of a bad hire, and optimize your candidate pipeline, you'll really need to look for ways to reduce cost and simultaneously speed up the process without any degradation in that quality. So, when you're able to find quality talent that fits well within your organizational culture, and that can really benefit by seeing a reduction in those turnover figures. And while reducing the steps or the number of steps within the process, the time taken to hire an employee, which amounts to a greater financial risk, like we just talked about, is something every executive leader is looking for. There's a major cultural impact to the business when candidate quality is taken into account, particularly to reduce turnover. So, I think recruiting a spend is an investment worth making, because it draws talented and passionate people to your organization and allows you to find the right talent, not just bodies. And you're going to need good hires if you want to be successful ultimately. And with such fierce competition right now in this environment, which is just absolutely unprecedented, there is really, no budget that should be cut at this point, right? You really can't have any reductions in recruiting spend or unused budget. And I do think that there's a lot of methodologies and opportunities to increase finding really top tier talent, and failure to spend money on those investments, or excuse me, failure to spend money or invest in those efforts is really, it can end up with higher turnover and poor quality talent, and a lot less innovation and growth for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you pointed that out, because looking at the market now, it really is a candidate centric market. It is in their favor. So anything organizations can do to bring awareness and build this information around their brand, and why someone, especially if you're considering them key talent for your organization, why you would want to bring them on, and you don't want to hold back those resources just for the sake of budget, but making sure that if that's someone who will be a key player on your team, you want to make those investments, make those key plays to get them involved and in the door within your organization. So great that you pointed that out. And Bree, how can HR leaders prove the value of risk management within their organization?
Right. And I think that's such an important question to ask, because as you guys are talking about, in such a, critical time for hiring right now, the HR function is really becoming a key component in organizations today. And so being able to really prove their value is it's very important for executive leadership to start to see how big of an impact they actually have on their organization. So first off, to show that value to executive leadership, it doesn't have to start with leadership in actuality. As Chris Corneen said, it can actually start by finding a cheerleader in your organization to help support your efforts. Secondly, to align your risk management initiatives with the mission of the organization's leaders, connect risk management right back to the bottom line. Show exactly how what you're doing can connect to a return on investment. Now, although the HR department doesn't typically, produce profits in their department, they can show how they've been able to reduce costs by mitigating non-compliance fines, by increasing the productivity and profitability of an organization, by finding the right talent, and by building a stronger workplace culture. Really what this all comes down to is breaking the work that you do down into dollars and cents, as Chris suggested. So when presenting the value of risk management to leadership, quantify the benefit that you're bringing, express the value within the organization as a whole, track how it impacts profitability and productivity, and show how it impacts workplace culture. You know, Jess and Ali, there are many organizational benefits when HR can properly represent the value of risk management to leadership. And Ali, this is where I want to get your input here. So what types of benefits do we see when HR and an organization's leader are aligned in risk management? And what consequences do we see if they're not aligned?
Right. So I think we all know that, having an aligned executive team or leadership team is critical when it comes to ensuring the overall success of the organization. But in this case, what it really allows you to do is your decision making is that much faster, right? So particularly when it's aligned using the right solutions and methodologies, and while you simultaneously have the ability to back up your decision-making process with data, right? So when you have all the data at the tips of your fingers and you can look at it in a very non-emotional way, it really allows you to say, to make those decisions a lot faster. Of course, you're going to have higher retention rates on your employee side when you're making the right hires out of that, coming out of those processes. You're going to increase overall productivity. So I think the benefits are really sort of limitless. And on the flip side of, the consequences are potentially limitless as well. So, aside from losing great candidates and having negative candidate experiences and higher overall costs and business costs specifically, you're also looking at increased turnover. You're looking at, a decrease in worker production. It's just sort of this waterfall of bad things that happen when there's a lack of alignment. And it's something that can be so easily fixed, either through putting processes in place or through, automation to help with that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you had mentioned, it's important once you have that alignment that you can make informed decisions smarter and faster. And I think that really goes back to earlier in our conversation about setting a benchmark and a gauge for where your organization is at. So establishing what is the current state of our organization, what's the current state of leadership, of HR, of different departments. Are they currently interacting? Is there alignment between those departments? Because if you don't have that benchmark to work off of and really understand, okay, what efficiencies need to be improved upon, what areas can there be improvement in communication and other areas of alignment. Once those things are established, you can make those informed decisions a lot faster. And in the end, it's smarter in the long run. So great that you brought that up. I know according to Chris, HR's role is really to help business leaders leverage what they consider to be the single most valuable resource that there is, and that's people. With the help of technology, leveraging your resources to mitigate that risk becomes much easier. Can you go further, Bree, into detail about technology's role in managing risk-wide organization?
Yeah, so the purpose of risk mitigation is to keep your organization safe, compliant, and reduce any unnecessary organizational costs. Ultimately, risk mitigation exists to support the future of your organization. However, your company can't be long-term profitable without caring for your people, which is something that Chris Corneen talked about a lot. And so to protect your people, you have to protect your business first. And this is where that HR technology conversation comes into play, because HR tech allows you to easily complete tasks, compile trends, make sense of data, secure your data, and ultimately it allows you the time and freedom to really start engaging more in those value-added initiatives that help make your organization better. Additionally, it can support you throughout your hiring and onboarding process to decrease the risk associated with a bad hire. Now, I already talked a little bit about what Verified First does. We're an HR technology solutions company specializing in background screening, and our role in the hiring process is to help reduce the risk associated with the bad hire and to help improve workplace safety, productivity, and profitability. And Ali, I want to hear from you. What does JazzHR do and other HR technology solutions, and how can they help, what types of risks can these HR technology solutions do to help HR leaders mitigate the risk by automating pieces of their HR workflow?
Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, a lot of that mitigation comes in simply through automate. So one, keeping the information secure and in one centralized location so that it's available, whether it's for auditing or compliance or EEO reporting, right? Like whatever it is, having it in one place is critical. Now, auditing your organization's workflows to implement process improvements or to better understand what's working and what's not can be a massive undertaking unless you have the right tools for the job. So when you are able to really assess your recruiting channel, not just your process, but also your channels to improve that ROI and to mitigate any increase in costs, it's essential to be able to just look at the data again, like I said before, in a very unemotional way and find the answer at your fingertips there. Not tracking recruitment metrics, you're often, people are making this mistake without even realizing it, but depending on your business and the types of skill sets that you need, some channels are often more effective than others. Understanding which are the most valuable to your organization and which are the most effective really helps you control those costs by allowing you to put dollars where they're going to have the biggest impact. And so, for example, surveyed hiring managers recently prefer referred candidates to those from more opaque channels, according to SHRM. Now, I don't think this is news to anybody. I think everyone values a referral probably above all else, right? But that also means that creating incentives for current employees to reach out to their own professional networks might lead to stronger hires while simultaneously controlling costs. And from a proven channel, having a personal reference that already works for you, you're obviously going to have a certain level of quality that you might not be able to find elsewhere. Also streamlining your recruiting pipeline for quicker time to hire and mitigating turnover lag time, it is another area that is, I think, critical to understanding when it comes to how to use an ATS in order to help automate this, right? So effective hiring managers have really engaged talent pipelines and they're ready to go before new positions are even technically marked as open. So preparing ahead of time really allows for quicker reaction times. If a current employee leaves without notice, hiring managers can just jump right into action and reach out to candidates that are in waiting. And to streamline this process, providing an option for applicants to submit their resumes and contact information via sort of like a general application or information general purpose form, rather than attaching each candidate to a specific role is super helpful. That really allows you to build that talent pool from which to draw as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. That is important to know and have a record of candidates that you've already either looked over their qualifications and ahead of time that they might be a good fit for a role that, like you said, may not officially be open as of yet, but you at least have an idea of what to look for, and even really candidates that might be up to the task and the role for that. So that's great. Just some closing thoughts as we finish out here today. Brianna, can you lay out 5 tips for our HR listeners when preparing for proactive risk management within their organization?
Yeah, of course. So first things first, being proactive about risk management means going out of your way to familiarize yourself with risks associated with your line of work. And to start to do this, the first thing is understanding the business. And while you can't predict every threat that's going to come your way, you can help identify the risks associated with your business by understanding the business's operations. The second thing is to create a risk management plan. Now that you've identified the risks that are potential to happen to your organization or your department, determine an action plan here. Identify what needs to be prioritized for mitigating that risk, and then help to figure out, not only how to prevent risk, but how to handle risk once it's already happened, once the threat has already taken place. The third thing is to revisit that risk business plan. And that is so vital because risk can change so rapidly, and there might have been risk that pops up in your organization that maybe you didn't know to account for. Maybe it's a scenario that's common to the business, but you didn't quite know or know how to hone in on that. So that's why it's important to go back through, audit your plan, reassess, and adapt. The fourth thing, which is something that is vital to your organization's foundation, is to find the right talent. Determine what type of risks are associated with your specific talent pool that you're hiring from, and then help to mitigate the risks in hiring by vetting your candidates and making sure that they will be a good culture fit. And the last thing today is to track how risk mitigation impacts profits. And this goes hand in hand with speaking to executive leaders and finding that alignment by showing them how your department's risk mitigation connects directly back to the bottom line. This shows, it supports your case when presenting the risk management, and it helps them to see the problem from a business perspective and not necessarily a risk perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really great actionable takeaways, Brianna. So thank you for sharing those with us as we wrap up. Well, it looks like we are at the end of our time here today. Bree and Allie, thank you so much for joining us. I'd also like to thank JazzHR for sponsoring today's HR Table Talk. We couldn't be more pleased with the partnership and ATS platform that you guys have, super comprehensive. So appreciate that partnership. Thank you for all of you joining us today for the conversation, and we hope to see you at our next episode.
Thank you, everybody. I love this. Great conversation. And thank you so much, Allie and JazzHR, for supporting this and joining in on our fun little conversation here.
Absolutely happy to be part of it, and we'll look forward to doing many more of these in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you both.